Hey everybody, Joe from HomeCrush here. For a long time, I've been wanting to supplement my 2 desktop monitors with a big dedicated video monitor for editing and color grading. Professional grading monitors like those from Sony, Canon, and Flanders Scientific are way out of my budget range, and quite frankly, totally overkill given that 90% plus of my work is for online delivery. Conversely, most budget displays don't offer proper controls to adequately calibrate. And if you can't trust your monitoring monitor to be accurate within a reasonable margin of error, then it's likely to do more harm than good. But luckily, we're working in a time when the differences between professional monitors and consumer displays are growing slimmer every day. The hardware is basically the same, the biggest difference being the available picture controls. If you're at all interested in this topic, you probably think I'm about to talk about LG's OLED TVs. And well, you should, because the LGs are the best large screen monitoring options for under $2,000. In fact, when a job came up that required a large monitor, I was all set to buy an LG 48CX. If your grading monitor needs to be physically close to you, the smaller 48-inch is actually preferable to its larger siblings, and it offers the same benefits as the bigger models for a little less money. But I needed that big screen for a shoot the very next day, and the LG wasn't available anywhere within driving distance. So I decided to take a chance on an even cheaper TV that I've been hearing good things about. Okay, I'm going to interrupt myself here and go on a little rant to try and reduce the number of angry responses I get to this video. There's a subset of colorists who will tell you that it's impossible to do an accurate color grade on anything other than a professional video monitor connected to a dedicated video output device and hardware calibrated with either expensive equipment or a professional technician. I understand that in theory they are absolutely correct, but in practical terms, bullshit. Bullshit, bullshit, complete bullshit. As with everything in life, there's perfect and there's good enough. Perfect is unattainable, and good enough is relative. But for an SDR grading monitor, there's pretty broad consensus on what constitutes good enough. Sustained brightness over 100 nit, contrast over 5000 to 1, 100% coverage of your target color space, gamma tracking, grayscale uniformity, and color accuracy, all within an error delta lower than 2. If your display can do all of those things, plus allows you to turn off any extraneous image processing, then you've got a perfectly adequate SDR grading monitor for the vast majority of people, for the vast majority of use cases. And guess what? That doesn't need to cost $25,000. It doesn't even cost $1,000. You can get a 55-inch display that allows you to dial in a reference picture for $600. End of rant. And that display is the Hisense H9G. What's so great about this monitor is not any of the marketing blah blah about quantum this or peak that, but rather the solid complement of picture controls that are readily available to an end user without even needing to dive into a service menu. Before I get into how to set up the H9G for SDR color grading, I encourage you to check out the H9G's reviews on ratings.com. There's a lot of great info there that I'm not going to bother repeating. The too long didn't read version is that the H9G has really solid specs. Brightness is pretty uniform across the panel, and it covers most of the P3 gamut. There are a few features missing that might give a next-gen gamer pause, and because it uses a VA panel, off-axis viewing is not good. But as a color grading monitor, which you should be viewing straight on, it handily beats any competitor in its price range, and many that cost a whole lot more. But we've got to do some work before the H9G is ready for monitoring. Out of the box, like virtually any consumer display, the image accuracy is pretty bad. Don't worry though, fixing it is pretty easy. Many of the necessary changes amount to toggling off post-processing options. And even the settings you'll need to uniquely tweak for your individual display are straightforward. And like I said, all these options are right in the standard consumer picture menu. No need to search for service menu unlock codes or to buy a special remote. For some of the settings, I'm going to be able to tell you exactly where to set them. But for many, you'll need to tweak them for your individual display. This is especially true for the settings in the calibration menu. Please resist copying a list of settings you find online. They will not work for your display. I promise. Nudging these controls even one notch can strongly impact the image, and no two panels are the same. I'll try to make it clear when I'm recommending a universal change applicable to everyone, and when you need to put up a test pattern and tweak for your unique screen. Also, the order in which you make some of these changes matters, because they impact each other. This means you'll have to bounce in and out of some menus a few times, but unless you have a specific reason to deviate, I suggest you make changes in the order I present them. Alright, first things first. Let's fix the remote. Out of the box, the remote is in infrared mode, and the range sucks. You have to point the remote right at the sensor, and if like me you've got your display on a wall behind your desktop displays, they block the IR sensor. Luckily, the remote is actually a smart Bluetooth remote with voice control. All you have to do is long press the Google button, and the remote will pair with your display. Easy peasy. Now the remote is responsive no matter where you point it. With that done, press the menu button and go into the picture menu. In the backlight menu, set local dimming to high. This will yield the blackest blacks and the highest contrast. If the blooming around bright objects bothers you, you can dial it down later. But I encourage you to evaluate that with real video content you actually work with, not artificial test images or a cursor on a black desktop. Set the backlight level to a comfortable brightness for your viewing environment, which by the way should be dimly lit with 5600 Kelvin light, but not pitch black. Technically, to spec, you should set the backlight to display a white field of exactly 100 nits. But modern consumer displays, both computer monitors and televisions, are so much brighter than this that this old standard is, quite frankly, so antiquated as to be counterproductive. If you do calibrate to 100 nits, virtually everyone who views your content will be doing so significantly brighter than you. Instead, adjust your backlight so that white looks like bright white without blowing out your vision. In a light-controlled room, that's going to be south of 400 nits, or 50 in the menu. But I can't tell you exactly where to put it. Adjust to your room and your taste. Then turn off the automatic light sensor and back out of the backlight menu. In the picture mode menu, choose Theater Night. This is the most accurate of any of the profiles, which means less tweaking in subsequent menus. Now for the moment, we're going to skip over the settings in the main picture menu and instead go into the advanced settings menu. Here, make sure overscan, motion enhancement, motion clearness, noise reduction, digital noise reduction, and active contrast are all off. HDMI dynamic range and color space should be left on auto unless you need to force them. You probably know if you do. Overscan should be toggled off, and auto content detection should be toggled on. Color temperature should be left at low. Back in the main picture menu, turn sharpness all the way down to 0. Artificial sharpness bad. Back out to the main picture menu, then dive into the calibration settings menu. Set your gamma to 2.2 if you're in a relatively bright room, or 2.4 if you're in a relatively dark room. Now back to the main picture menu for one of the most important adjustments we're going to make: contrast. The out-of-the-box contrast setting of 50 is way too high. It's designed to make the screen pop on store shelves, but it blows out your highlights and makes skin tones look like a psychedelic poster from 1967. Before doing anything else, you need to dial this down to the highest point that doesn't crush the image. To do this by eye, you need an image that displays both the grayscale and skin tones at the same time. It's not hard to find such an image, but the fact that the picture menu covers a third of the screen presents a challenge. So, being the magnanimous dude that I am, I've made a test image for you. The download link is in the description below. Just make sure to display it full screen through whatever app you use to do your editing or color grading. With the test image on the screen, bring the contrast down until the high end of the grayscale smoothly rolls off to white, and you don't see any nasty posterization in the transitions between highlight and shadow on faces. At this point, you'll probably notice that the color of grayscale patches are not uniform. Some patches will be greener, or more magenta, or more blue, or red. Don't worry about the color of the grayscale yet. Just concentrate on the roll-off to white. For me, dialing in the contrast results in a setting between 30 to 35. At first, these levels will probably feel like you've sucked the life out of the image. It's okay, this is to be expected. Trust me, your eyes will very quickly adjust, and if you don't get your contrast into a reasonable range, no amount of tweaking to other settings will ever get you to an accurate image. With this same test image up, you can now adjust brightness. You want to barely see the second darkest patch. To dial in brightness even better, use a video test pattern with blinking patches. Next, it's time to adjust color and tint. Here we get to one of the reasons to really love the H9G, because it actually allows us to display a blue-only mode, which in turn allows us to use a standard saturation tint test image to easily dial in these settings. First, get the test video playing on a loop. I'll link to one on YouTube, but you should find one you can download and play in your NLE. With that playing, go into the calibration menu, go into RGB only menu, and choose blue. Note the blinking squares inside the test pattern. All you have to do now is adjust color, or saturation, and tint, hue, until the blinking squares disappear. You'll likely find yourself increasing the saturation above 50 because of the previous reduction in contrast. You'll likely only be adjusting tint a tick or two either direction. Now turn off RGB only mode, and at this point your image should already be a lot better. In terms of overall image, you should definitely be in the ballpark. Subsequent adjustments, which will all take place in the calibration settings menu, are important, but will be much more subtle. Inside the calibration menu, for now, ignore the color tuner menu. This menu allows you to directly tweak primary and secondary colors, but doing so before dialing in your grayscale is counterproductive. So let's first go into the white balance menu. The 2-point menu allows you to broadly balance your shadows, offset, and highlights, gain. Get a grayscale on screen and try to get the bottom half and the top half to be as equally neutral as possible. If you're adjusting any color more than plus or minus 5, you're probably going too far. No matter how good you do here, you're still going to be left with certain steps in the grayscale where the color shifts one way or another. That's okay, remember this is a broad adjustment. Once you've got your image as neutral and balanced as you can in the 2-point menu, it's time to back out and then into the 20-point menu. First, turn it on. Now you can tweak the balance in 5% increments to really dial in your color. Use the level setting to choose which value you are adjusting, 5 being the darkest, 100 the lightest. These are very subtle adjustments. Tweaking RG or B just a notch or two will make a noticeable difference. For my display, no value is more than plus or minus 5, with most of the adjustments just being plus or minus 1. Look for areas in the grayscale where the color shifts. Find the appropriate level in the menu, and tweak until the color evens out. Watch how this affects the skin tones in the test image. When you're done, you should have a grayscale with matching neutral color from black to white, and natural skin tones without ugly hue shifts from shadow to highlight. Now the final adjustment to make is gamma calibration. Whereas the white balance settings affect color, gamma settings affect brightness. If the brightness of your grayscale does not evenly transition from dark to light, here is where you can adjust that brightness in discrete 5% steps. This is probably the trickiest setting to adjust by eye, and your display is probably dialed in pretty well already. So unless your grayscale is obviously off, or you have a hardware sensor, you might want to leave the gamma calibration alone. Alright, if you've done all the above correctly, your average error delta is probably less than 2. And if you do all of the above with the aid of a hardware sensor, you should have a delta dangerously close to 1, and by any reasonable standard,
a damn fine cup of coffee.
As you work with the display, if you notice certain memory colors look a bit off, but you can tell from your scopes that the signal is correct, then you can use the color tune settings that we ignored earlier to tweak a specific color to look more like what you expect. As always, be judicious because a little goes a long way. It's a shame more displays don't offer this level of control. Vizio and TCL both offer comparably priced displays that could work equally well as grading monitors if they did. Thankfully, Hisense does, and they should be applauded for exposing these important controls to us mere mortals. If you can stretch your budget to buy an LG OLED, the service remote, and a compatible hardware calibrator, I still recommend you do so. That combination punches way above its weight class. But there's nothing like grading on a big dedicated display, and if you need to stay under $1,000, the Hisense H9G can't be beat. I hope you found this video useful. If you did, hit that like button and subscribe. It gives me the warm fuzzies and helps other people discover the channel. If you're a Blackmagic Design Pocket Cinema camera shooter, consider purchasing my Pocket LUTs. They give you a very accurate starting point for your creative color grade, and their purchase helps subsidize videos like this. That's it. Now get out there and crush it.